that was the only thing you were looking forward to all weekend the last couple of weeks. Anthony and I had other things going on. We couldn't be talking to you live, but we're going to do that right now. Of course, we know you all are kind of going through it right now. Totally understandable based on where this season's at. We're going to talk about that plenty, but I, on behalf of the entire Trojan Dash crew, appreciate you all for coming to us as your coping mechanism. Anthony, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. I'm ready to be a therapist, for everyone who's joined Trojan Dash, as a coping mechanism. It's been a rough couple of weeks, no Trojan Dash, but we're back like we never left. I'm ready.
We're back like we never left. One thing that's not back like it never left is USC football. It had 2 weeks off because of the bye, obviously. Came out to South Bend to take on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and they did not win the football game. They dropped it 31-16. There was a point in there where it was getting kind of close and things were getting kind of interesting. Ultimately, it was not meant to be. Anthony, why don't we start with some of the bright spots? Because I think you and I were talking before we started the show. They didn't actually play that terrible of a football game. I mean, sometimes you take games like the Stanford game, take the Oregon State game, you take the Utah game, and it's like, wow, that was a pretty pathetic effort all the way around. I didn't really feel that with this game. So why don't we talk about some of the silver linings from this one? And I'm full disclosure, I don't understand my own reference to the movie I quoted in that little cut line there. I just figured I know what a silver lining is, and it felt like there was a football pun to be made with the playbook there. So I did it to try to show that I have some pop culture chops. It didn't really work. Might have been a failed attempt. But anyway, Anthony, what were your positive takeaways from an overall negative game by the Trojans?
I like to say I don't get the reference either, but it sounds good, so that's all that matters. But yeah, the positives. I do agree, though. I think they played technically a horrible game. Definitely, those 3 games you mentioned were much worse. The main positive for me is Keante Ingram. We've talked about him on this show, and I've mentioned how I really would like to see him be the lead back, and he really was the lead back last night in South Bend. He had a season high 132 yards rushing, and he really looked like the best offensive player in the second half, outside obviously Drake London because he's just in another world. But he really kept the Trojans there. I mean, he really kept them in it, gave them some momentum. And I've really been interested in seeing why not go back to the traditional USC style of handing the ball off, feeding the running back to start the game off, and then going for deep shots, going for traditional plays instead of, the short screens and all that. I know it's like the air raid, but why not mix it up? You're 3-4. What can you possibly lose? But he was really a bright spot. And I think the offensive line coming together in the second half is an underrated bright spot because they really struggled in that first half. I mean, the first play of the game was a sack. And this is a young offensive line outside of Brett Nealon, who's been there forever. It's a pretty young offensive line. So for them to come together and really stay in it and build off of a poor first half, I thought was a huge positive. Hopefully give them some confidence because the offensive line hasn't really been too bad, honestly. I mean, they've been all right. I mean, sometimes it's been terrible, like the first half against Notre Dame, but sometimes it's been like the second half against Notre Dame where they're creating gaps and stuff. But I think the main offensive focus or the positive is really Keante Ingram. You've got to get him more involved. And I think he made some pass catching plays, but just handing the ball off, letting him run is really going to help the offense because they're becoming more predictable. And Keane Slovis was asked that after the game if they think they're being predictable, and he obviously says no. But I don't know. I think getting Ingram the ball more will help them out. But that was really the main positive for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you threw in the note about the offensive line there because I think that was one of the biggest things that allowed them to open up the run game in the first place. And you talked about the first play of the game. Not only was it a sack, it was a sack on a drop 8. They just got totally beat. And then the third play of the game, they sent 5, and then it was just, Keaton Slovis ran around in the pocket for like 10 seconds and then ultimately had to throw it away. It was a pretty ugly opening drive for the Trojans, but they definitely, I thought as the game went on, the offensive line got better and better. I think Dante Williams said the same thing in the post-game press conference, but that really opened game 2, and best case scenario, what you get out of the last 5 games of this year, and we're going to talk about some of the storylines to watch over the last 5 games. is this coaching staff sort of figuring out how to actually run the football effectively and open up that run game, because it's something that we haven't seen in the past couple seasons. And whether Graham Harrell is going to be here next year under the new head coach is anybody's guess, but it's definitely good to see some of those, things trending in that way, especially when you're losing Drake London to the NFL in the offseason. You're going to need to, rely on the running backs even more. So I thought that was definitely a bright spot, like you said. Drake London, you kind of touched on it, but 171 yards, 15 receptions. He only had one really highlight reel grab, but I was realizing around halftime, it's that's just because he's been wide open every single time. He doesn't really need to do that this time. So he just continues to separate himself from the pack. He's been probably the best story for this USC team all season. I thought that was really good to see, just sort of, something for them to root for. And I'm sure we'll talk about that in the latter third of the show as well. But it seems like when everything around them is so inconsistent and so bad at times, he's just the one constant there. He leads FBS receivers in receiving yards per game with 143.3. That is a 23.7 yard lead over number 2. Which is a pretty significant gap. It seems like he's the Biletnikoff front runner at this point. It seems like he's kind of running away with that. So that obviously was something that was great to see. I thought overall, too, just the fight that this team showed in the last quarter and a half of that game was really promising, because that's something that we haven't seen many times. You see they get down at halftime, especially when they're down, 14 points at the half. Games seemingly slipping out of their reach. They could have definitely just folded there, and that's something that we've seen against Stanford, against Oregon State, against Utah. They come out with low energy, and it's just not the same in the second half. Didn't really see as much of that. You had the interception by Chris Steele, ultimately led to a touchdown, made it a one-score game, and obviously the Irish came back with a touchdown right after that. That pretty much put it out of reach, but at that point, I'm not really concerned about the actual result. I'm kind of just because they weren't going to win that game, right? Even if they get the ball back there, it's probably not going to happen. So I'm just looking to see if there's some pulse there, and I think I definitely saw that last night. It's not something. You never want to take any moral victories away from a rivalry game with a team like USC, because that shouldn't be the standard at this point. But just one of those things that we haven't seen in previous games that I thought was great to see. Keaton Slovis, I thought, was okay. I think he had his moments. I don't think he was really that bad. I think, I don't know if it's necessarily a huge bright spot, but actually one of the other bright spots is that they didn't rush Jackson Dart back. I was thinking he wasn't even cleared on Thursday, and he was warming up on the field prior to the game. I was thinking, yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know if it's really in their best interest to rush the kid back, especially against a team like that. In an environment like that, you never know what can happen there. So obviously, if he was 100% healthy, I would have supported him playing, because I think he's the future. But I think just being careful with him was one of the best things overall that I saw. It could have been tempting to throw him in there, but I think this coaching staff and the medical staff is smart enough not to mortgage the future like that. So that was good. Yeah, those are pretty much the main things that I saw. I thought, like we said, they didn't play that terrible. And I think if they put up that kind of performance, obviously they need to do a better job tackling, limit the penalties. The miscommunication around halftime, which we will definitely get into, was terrible. They need to have everybody on the same page. But if you were to take that performance and basically extrapolate that over the last 5 games of the season, I don't know, 3-2, probably, maybe 4-1. I didn't think they played that poorly. Just have some things to clean up there. And at this point in the season, you're looking for development, and you're looking for progress, and you're looking for steps. And I think you're looking for culture too. And I think the culture from that game, like I talked about with the second half, heart, showing that fight, I don't know, it's cheesy, I guess, and doesn't make you feel a whole lot better, because that was a winnable game. They could have won that game. And I think that's what, is one of the more disappointing things, is people came into that game with low expectations. They were like, this is going to be a blowout. And it wasn't a blowout, but it wasn't like a nail biter. Except for one point there in the fourth, when you never really felt like they were going to get it done anyway. But I think that's what made it sting a little bit more. That was a winnable game. They just have to clean some things up. But other than that, I think there were definitely some positive things to take away. Notably, the offensive line, I would say, is up there right at the top.
Yeah, if I could add one thing real quick, you talked about the fight. at the end of the game. I think also one thing that happened throughout the game was the corners that were kind of been exposed in previous games. I thought that they did a pretty good job of just holding their own. It wasn't, too bad. I didn't see any kind of really bad defensive mistakes. I thought Chris Steele played probably his best game of the year, especially with that interception that was huge. So I think that's just like another underrated small thing. But yeah, you really touched upon it all. I thought it was a winnable game, even though the score was 24-3 at one point. I thought it wasn't more of what Notre Dame was doing, but more of what USC was doing to themselves. Obviously, it's easy to say that now, but I agree that I think it was a winnable game.
The one thing I will add there is after the game, Dante Williams said, I don't really feel like we lost that game. I feel like we just ran out of time. They were up 15 points and they were kneeling the ball inside the 10-yard line. They would not, if that game's another quarter, another 2 quarters, they're not going to win that game. So I don't know. But back to the point about Steele, I thought the PI that they called on him at some point in the third or fourth quarter too. That's inflating for the game. That was not a PI. I asked Steele, I asked Dante about that, and they both said basically no comments, and I think that pretty much sums it up pretty well. But other than the refs, which obviously are not the reason why they lost that game, why don't we get into some of the bad? I'll start actually because I think this game, after the game, Keaton Slovis talked a lot about the middle 8 minutes. That's the last 4 minutes of the first half and the first 4 minutes of the second half. He said that's where you often the winner of the football game is basically determined in those middle 8 minutes right there. And that theme held true again because, yikes, it was an ugly middle 8 minutes. I think Notre Dame actually scored just outside 4 minutes, but for all intents and purposes, we can count it there. And then there was the sequence at the end of the half where, you could see them maybe taking some momentum into the break by scoring 3 or possibly 7 points. And then there was the whole, we're going to run a play, and what play are we going to run? Everybody was on a different – it seemed like nobody was on the same page about whether they were going to run a play, and then nobody was on the same page about what play they were going to run, given that they were going to run a play. So the communication all around there between Harold Williams and Keaton Slovis was just horrendous, and they all said those are things that can't happen, and Keaton Slovis said, that's something that as a quarterback, it's my job to get everybody on the same page there. I thought that was probably the worst individual moment from that game, especially because you can take some, you can take points coming into halftime. You can cut that to an 11-point game, maybe even a 7-point game. Instead, you get nothing out of it, and it just kind of spiraled from there until it was too late. So that was my main takeaway. It just was not a very smart football game. I thought Slovis also had some questionable decision-making there too. There were some points where he hung in the pocket a little bit too long and it cost him, whether he got hit as he threw or he took a sack or something like that. And there were some, I don't know, it seems like his pocket awareness, we've talked about it in previous weeks, it just hasn't been all that great so far this year. He made some plays, like we said, there were some nice moments there, but overall, not the most, intelligent game all around from USC, I thought.
Yeah, that ends in the first half made no sense. I'm still trying to recover. I honestly don't know what they were trying to do. I think
No.
We'll just not talk about it. But a main thing, actually, underrated thing is the defense couldn't get stops on third down, which I think really hurt their ability. Notre Dame was 8 of 12 on third down, so that's what 66%, and their season average is 34% on third down. So they couldn't get those stops. And that really hurt their momentum because it was like a 3rd and long and like a 3rd and 11, 3rd and 12, and they couldn't get that stop. And that kind of just sucks the life out of you as a defense. So if one of those goes the other way, it might have been a closer game because that's just the story of it. And then also the red zone, it just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what goes on there. I mean, every game, we talk about it every time on Trojan Dash. The red zone inability, inefficiency, it just doesn't add up because they get in there and it's almost like they're not sure what to do, and Slovis will get a deep sack or Parker Lewis will miss a field goal. It's very, very weird. And I think they left 4 points on the board last night. So when they scored to make it 16, it could have been 31-20. It's still double digits, but it doesn't look too bad. And I think the run game for Notre Dame it really hurt USC. I mean, coming into this game, weren't really doing too much on the run game, and I forgot, I forgot his name, Notre Dame's running back, but he had his best game of the season, highest rushing yards and the most touchdowns in the game this year against USC, and this is a team that was not running the ball particularly well, and USC's run defense seemed like more in the second half wasn't really able to contain them. So I think those three real quick were the main ones, but definitely the third down I think hurt them a lot. It just kind of just didn't give them any momentum, and they weren't able to get anything going on that side. Also, the long drives by Notre Dame just really hurts. It was like multiple 12, 13 play drives and multiple 5-minute drives. And if you're on the field for 5 minutes, and that was one part, Notre Dame was on the field, the offense, for 5 minutes, and then USC came out, quick 3-and-out. The defense is back out, another long drive. And that just builds up, and it can happen. Also, one thing I just remembered, there's so many things, but the substitutions, I don't know what was going on. It was like they were subbing people out nonstop for no reason. There was one time where Dante Williams actually called a timeout because they weren't making the subs, and the timeout time was running out, the 3 minutes, and they were still making subs by the end of the 3 minutes. It was like they were like messing with us. I mean, how does that happen? You're not that prepared to do the subs, and you keep switching it up. It honestly made no sense to me. Most of this game made no sense, and that's all I have for One Went South. I'll let you take over.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm the type of guy to be like, oh, you had a bye week to prepare for this game, therefore you should have played perfectly. Because once you're playing against the other team in the other team's stadium, like it's an entirely different game. But when you're talking about something like substitutions, which are completely unforced, like you can control, that's under your control. Their offense was not so high tempo that like you didn't have time to make any substitutions, and yet they still couldn't get that done. There was a point where they needed, like you said, to burn a timeout in the first half. That timeout could have really helped them with a few seconds left before halftime and getting Parker Lewis and the special teams unit onto the field to get some points coming into the break. So it all kind of feeds back into each other. As far as what else went south, I kind of want to say the penalties, but I also don't, because there were some questionable calls there. And then a couple times it was like, there were some false starts on the offensive line, and it was like, okay, you don't want that, of course, but do you maybe give them a little bit of a pass? Loud stadium, hostile environment. So there was a point where it was like back to back, which obviously that can't happen. But maybe I'm just more inclined to be lighter on the offensive line because they did a pretty good job overall. But I don't know. The penalties were definitely not great, but they weren't like, I don't think that that's what lost them the game per se. I also think you kind of nailed it with the third downs on defense. There was a point in that game where I was like, they're actually doing a pretty good job with defense in the red zone. Like when Slovis threw that one pick, I believe the score was 7-0, and Slovis threw that pick.
Yeah,
and it was brought down inside the 5, and Slovis actually made the tackle there. And it seemed like a somewhat nice hustle play, but meaningless because they were just going to score right after that. But they actually held them there to 3 points and kept that a 10-0 game, which really kept them in it. Then USC, I think, responded with a field goal. And then all of a sudden you're down 7. And that was a point in the game where it could have been 17-0 or 14-0. And, not that much later, it was like 10-3. And you're like, okay, that really, stopped things from spiraling and getting out of hand. So I thought that, I know we're not doing bright spots right now, but I thought that was like something that they did okay. And then there was a point in the third, like just as I was thinking that same thought, they like burned USC on a 3rd and 13 that got them within inside the 5, and then they scored a touchdown, and that was a real missed opportunity there. So, you're definitely right about the third downs. That wasn't great. I also thought the inability to get anything else aside from Drake London going in the first half, and we've talked about this before. Like if you need to keep on going to him because he's really good at football, keep on going to him. But at halftime, USC's second leading receiver had 1 reception for 11 yards. I think it was Taj Washington. It's like, okay. Drake London had 9 receptions for 108 yards, something crazy like that through like a quarter and a half or through 2 quarters, 1 half. But, it's like you want to see a little bit more, especially from a developmental standpoint. It's not like something that you're, really thinking that's why they lost the game, because it's not like nobody was getting those yards and those catches. It was just Drake London getting all of them. So I'm not going to like harp on that too much. It was just something that I would have liked to see more of. The offensive line should have started the game off better. Again, I'm going to give them a pass for that because they got a lot better. But I mean, Keaton Slovis can't be getting sacked on drop 8 when he has 5 seconds in the pocket, because he actually had a little bit of time on that play. It wasn't like he snapped it and then immediately guys were on him. It's like he held on to that ball for way too long. And Dante Williams even said that after the game. He was like, when a guy gets sacked, it's not just the offensive line's fault. It's not just a tight end's fault. It's not just a running back's fault. It can be all of those things. Sometimes it can even be Keaton Slovis holding on to the ball for way too long, which I thought was a good point because that did happen at some points, which, wasn't great. But again, he didn't play a terrible game. Like nobody played a terrible game. Can you think of anybody who played a really, really bad game? I can't.
Yeah, honestly, I feel the same way. I didn't think anyone really stood out that was just horrible. I think it was a collective effort of kind of average to mediocre football. It wasn't someone who caused the loss.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that I think also cost them was tackling. They just weren't physical enough. They missed way too many tackles. They had several chances to stop plays behind the line of scrimmage, or at least with only a 1 or 2 yard gain, and it ended up costing them. I think on the third down conversion, actually, they almost had a sack, or they almost had a tackle for loss or something like that, and they weren't able to do it, and ended up translating into 7 points. So, I don't know. Maybe it's like you haven't been tackling at full speed in games for a couple of weeks, so it's just something with rust. But that's something you need to be able to work around, because the Fighting Irish had a bye week too, and they didn't have any of those same problems. So whatever. There were some things that didn't really go great, obviously, as indicated by the final score. But like we said, it wasn't an overall terrible performance. They've definitely played worse this year, and it came against a pretty good team on the road, tough environment, cold, if you want to use that as an excuse. So like whatever. They weren't going to win that game. I think the thing that just really stings is that it was winnable. And if they make a few more plays here and there, they probably have a good chance to pull that one out. But whatever. Let's move on. Let's look ahead to the rest of the season. Now USC is 3-4 overall. They have games against Arizona State, Cal, BYU, and UCLA. Maybe UCLA and BYU. I don't know which one's which. I think BYU is last, actually. They need to go 3-2 in those 5 games to go bowling. You really only see 2 likely wins. I don't even want to say guaranteed wins at this point, because we know what USC does at the Coliseum against teams that are on, a certain losing streak. Like, Utah hadn't won in the Coliseum or in Los Angeles since like 19. Oregon State had done it 1950 or 56 or whatever it was. Arizona State hasn't won a football game in, I think it's 250 years. So that might happen at the Coliseum this weekend, which would be objectively hilarious. It would be kind of sad too. So they're probably going to win that game. They're probably going to beat Cal. And then they got to win one of USC, UCLA, BYU, and Arizona State. Honestly, I see them going 0-3 in those games. If they can pull out one of them and take care of the other 2 easier ones, they'll be in a meaningless bowl game. And I don't know if people are excited about that, but I guess it's more appealing than going 5-7. So aside from the idea of going to the Jimmy Kimmel LA Bowl at SoFi Stadium, which actually would be pretty cool, tell me what are you looking for in the last 5 games of the season when people might have checked out? Nobody's really, I don't know, living and dying on every snap, I feel like, which can happen when you have a better football team. So what are some of the main storylines you're keeping an eye out for? What still matters, I guess, to put it as it says on the screen?
I'll start with the less sexier one, then I'll go to the better one. And the one I'll say is how Darwin Baller will look, and if he's going to get more reps. I think he's going to be the future of the USC backs. I think Vavai is gone, and I think Keante will. I think he'll stay, but I think Darwin Barlow will have a pretty big role next season. So I'll be interested to see if he gets more run, because he's looked pretty good. He's very energetic. He's very spry, and he's quick. And I think that they could use him in some situations. And the next one, the one everyone thinks of, will Jackson Dart play? That's the one thing that everyone wants to know. So, I'm interested to see if he will get run, if Keaton Slovis will get benched. That's really the main thing that I'm really looking forward to, because like you said, who wants to play in a meaningless bowl game at, 7-5 5 or something, or that would be their record, or 7-6. I don't know, but who knows what will happen with that? And I think I agree with you. I don't know. I don't see them beating Arizona State on the road. Definitely don't see them beating BYU. And I think UCLA is a toss-up only because it's a rivalry game and weird stuff happens in rivalry games. But I'm very intrigued about Jackson Dart. And also, one last thing, Drake London. I have a feeling I want to see if he's going to get 200 receiving yards in a game and if he'll break Robert Woods' record. That's one thing, just for the jokes, for the fun, keeping a little tally. But outside of that, nothing really matters anymore. The season is over. The season's been over. But those are the three things really for me.
Yeah, on the London point, I think that's obviously a storyline to watch just because it's fun. And I think I wrote a story about this for USCAnnenbergmedia.com, which you should all follow, not the Daily Trojan. Don't follow them. About how what Drake London's doing this season is remarkable. And do you remember when he came in freshman year and he was the number 4 behind Pittman, Vaughns, and St. Brown? He's probably the best out of that core. And what he's doing right now is like Biletnikoff front runner material, but also like could he eke into the Heisman conversation because he's been absolutely outstanding. Maybe not. Maybe it's still a quarterback's competition, but the fact that we're even talking about that, the fact that we're even mentioning a Biletnikoff front runner just goes to show what he's done this year. It's been the highlights, it's been the stats, he's really done everything. And I think even if they don't win in a single game the rest of the year, it's like Drake London's going to do what Drake London's been doing all season. He's had 4 games this year of at least 160 receiving yards. They're 1-3 in those games. So that means whatever happens, if they get blown out by UCLA, blown out by Arizona State, BYU, whatever, Drake London's going to go nuts. And I think that alone is worth tuning into just because everybody likes Drake London. He's a great guy. He's a freakishly talented athlete. And he's only going to be around for 1 more year. So I think appreciate that while you can, savor it while you can, because it's not going to last forever. I'm also looking at Corey Foreman. I want to see him get more involved in this USC defense. One of the reasons Dante Williams said, actually just about a couple hours ago, that Foreman didn't play a lot. He played a bit, but not a lot against the Irish was because they were offering a sort of run-heavy offensive attack, and he had lost like a little bit of weight, so they wanted more size in there. I say, so what? Like, what just as we've been saying, what's going to come out of this season? You're not going to the college football playoff. You're probably not going to go to the Pac-12 championship. Utah needs to lose 3 of its final 5 games, which is not going to happen probably. And USC needs to win out. Hope Arizona State loses 1 more. Hope UCLA loses 1 more. That's not happening. They're not playing for much here. I kind of want to see the 12th best recruit of all time get some action because he's only going to be here so long too, and I just want to see what the guy can do because he's a stud. I want to see him get more involved as the season goes on. Generally, I think he's gotten more and more action with each game this year. I guess yesterday was sort of, a counter to that trend. But I want to see that continue where he keeps on playing and keeps on showing what he can do because he's a stud. Like you said, Jackson Dart, I want to see when he comes back. I'm really curious to see that. And is it going to be like as soon as he's 100% healthy, is he just going to start and is he just going to get like all the snaps? Because Dante Williams said after last night's game that Jackson Dart was cleared to an extent. I don't know what that means. He said he could throw, he could do some light things, but he couldn't run and he couldn't take a hit. Well, like that's football. So I don't know how you can be cleared to an extent. I think him warming up on the field prior to that game was a total bluff because I don't think there was any way they were going to throw him into that game when he's missed. What is it, like 5 weeks now? You're going to throw him in after 5 weeks off against that team. Like, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. But like I said, when he gets 100% healthy, I'm curious to see whether he just starts right off the bat because, like we said, Keaton Slovis last week he's not outstanding, but he wasn't terrible. Like I don't know if he was bad to the point where he's like should be losing his job. I think he has been that in weeks previous, and I think that if he were to do that again against say Arizona. Although he probably won't because he's been tearing up the bad teams this year. But if he were to have a week or two where he's just not great and he's not, really doing anything for this offense, he's not really catalyzing anything, I think there's no reason not to put in Dart if he's 100% healthy, especially because he is the future. Like you said, he seems to be the future of that quarterback position for this team. So there are a lot of things that matter, I guess, is my overall point. I think the running game, whoever's taking most of the snaps this year, and whether they're going to be here next year or not, like obviously it'd be nice to get some of those guys back, Ingram, Barlow, of course, but I think even if, let's say, everybody were to leave, I think it's just encouraging to see that Graham Harrell knows how to run the football. Like, I think that in and of itself, and like I said earlier in the show, like he might not even be here next year under the new staff, but just to show like some semblance of life from the run game that we've been lacking for 3 years would be nice, because it, I don't know, gives you some faith in the future of this program. Because I do think that there are some talented backs there. They just haven't been effectively utilized in the last couple of years. But those are my big things. I think we're far from the point of just checking out, because I don't know, there are things that matter. This program, I think, is headed in the right direction as far as, I don't know, I think you started to see signs last week of the sort of cultural shift that people expected to happen like that when Clay Helton was fired, and that's not really how it works, but I think it's starting to come together a bit. I think the second half, the fourth quarter especially, of that Notre Dame game last night was telling, because they seemed like they cared and they seemed like they wanted to win. And walking off the field, they all looked pretty bummed, and they looked bummed in ways that I don't know if I've seen them before. I mean, that's just me looking at their face. So, obviously take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I think those are the biggest things. And I think there are still plenty of reasons to stay tuned into this team. And that's not just because we want you all to continue watching Trojan Dash every Sunday at 8 p.m. But Anthony, that's all I got. What do you have before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think you touched it all. Honestly, yeah, I'm more intrigued to see the Dart thing, how that would plays out. Maybe if he just becomes like a red zone threat, I think that would be a pretty interesting way to bring him in. But yeah, you touched it all.
Cool. That's all we got for you tonight on Trojan Dash. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Like I said, we like to be sort of, I don't know, you said therapist earlier in the show. I like that word. I think maybe this is a good counseling session we've got going on right now. We have a good thing with the Trojan Dash family, but unfortunately we cannot reconvene until next Sunday night, when hopefully we're not going to need that coping, because they're playing Arizona, and if they lose that game, oh man, it's going to get ugly. But we'll have to see how that all plays out. Until then, make sure to follow us on all of our various social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram. Go to our website, dashsports.tv, Twitter. How could I leave out Twitter? That's like our main thing. Make sure to check out all of our other shows across the Dash Sports Network. And catch us again on Trojan Dash next Sunday at 8 p.m. Anthony, any parting words?
Happy birthday to Drake. That's all I have to say.
All right. Bye. We'll talk to you guys next time.